On a moonless night in the late 1940s, somewhere on the back roads of North Carolina, a federal agent sat in the dark with his headlights off, listening. He was a revenuer, a treasury man whose whole job was catching the moonshine runners who owned these mountain roads after midnight. He heard the engine before he saw it. A Ford coupe came out of the dark, running without lights, loaded with more than 100 gallons of illegal whiskey. The agent hit his own starter and gave chase. He lost. He almost always lost. This is the story of that war, the decades-long back road chase between the law and the bootleggers. It's the story of the cars on both sides. And it's the story of how the men running from the police became the founding fathers of America's biggest motorsport. NASCAR was founded in 1948. But the cars, the drivers, and the driving skills it was built on were forged decades earlier, in a running battle between southern moonshine haulers and the federal agents trying to catch them. This is usually told as an outlaw story, but there are two sides to every chase. For every souped-up whiskey car tearing through the Blue Ridge at night, there was a lawman trying to run it down and losing, then learning, then upgrading, then losing again. That cat-and-mouse game drove the technology, the tactics, and the talent on both sides. You'll meet the federal agent so relentless that moonshiners painted his nickname on their barrels. You'll see why the law was almost always a step behind and what they did about it. And you'll see how the exact skills that beat the police on Saturday night turned into checkered flags on Sunday afternoon. It's the arms race that built a sport, and it started with a tax. To understand the chase, you have to understand why there was a chase at all, and the surprising answer is, it was never really about prohibition. When the 18th Amendment took effect in 1920 and banned alcohol nationwide, it created a black market overnight. But in the mountains of Appalachia, families had been making untaxed corn whiskey for generations, and the people chasing them weren't beat cops. They were federal revenue agents, called revenuers, working for the Treasury Department. Their job wasn't morality, it was money. The federal government wanted the tax on every gallon of liquor, and the moonshiners weren't paying it. That's the key thing most retellings miss. When Prohibition was repealed in 1933, the chase didn't stop. The revenuers kept right on coming because untaxed whiskey was still untaxed whiskey. The agency that hunted the moonshiners, the one that traces its roots to those Prohibition revenuers, is the same one we know today as the ATF. For these agents, the backroad war ran for decades, long after legal liquor returned to the shelves. And the agent's job was brutally hard. As one Virginia liquor agent put it, the only way to catch a moonshiner was to sit very, very still in the woods, sometimes for hours, in the dark, hoping a still would give itself away. Most stakeouts came up empty. Catching the whiskey on the move, on the road, was even harder, which is where the cars came in. The moonshine runner needed a car that could do two contradictory things at once: look completely ordinary and outrun anything the government could field. In the early years, the favorite was whatever was fast and common, a Hudson, a Ford. But everything changed with the 1932 Ford V8. For around $460, a runner could buy an ordinary-looking sedan that, with a few weekends of work, could top 100 miles an hour. And crucially, it didn't look like anything special. That was the entire point. The modifications became an underground art form. Heavy-duty springs and shocks, often welded from junkyard parts, so the car wouldn't sag under 100+ gallons of liquor and tip off any agent watching it roll past. Bigger carburetors and reworked engines making well over 100 horsepower. Auxiliary fuel tanks, because stopping for gas mid-run was a good way to get caught. Some runners built false floors and hidden tanks. The best of them could pour the load into a compartment that looked to a flashlight at a roadblock, like an empty trunk. The runners got creative and occasionally vicious with anti-pursuit tricks. Family legend among moonshine families describes cars rigged to dump oil or kick up smoke to blind a chasing agent, and runners who'd simply tap a government car off the road at speed and keep driving. How many of those stories are literally true and how many grew in the retelling is impossible to say. But the core fact is solid. The runners' cars were purpose-built to defeat the law, and they usually did. By the 1950s, the runners had moved to even faster iron. One famous hauler, Jerry Rushing, ran a modified 1958 Chrysler 300 he claimed could hit 140 miles an hour, far more than most police cars of the day. Another runner special-ordered a 1957 Ford Fairlane with the factory's rare supercharged F-code V8, 300 horsepower, picking the most powerful engine he could get in the most boring-looking body he could find. That was the runner's whole philosophy in one car: maximum speed, minimum attention. Now flip it around. Put yourself in the agent's seat. You're driving a government car, bought on a federal budget, chosen for cost, not speed. It's a stock sedan, the same kind of underpowered fleet vehicle every department of the era was stuck with, and you are chasing a car that has been specifically engineered by a backwoods mechanic with everything to lose to beat exactly the car you're driving. It was, on paper, an impossible job. There's a documented account from one runner's family of an agent who had caught up alongside a loaded 1939 Ford on a back road, only for the haulers to tap his government car off the road and vanish toward a hidden cabin on the Dan River, the kind with a door big enough to drive straight through. The agents would chase, and the smart runners would run a two-car relay, a decoy car out front to draw the chase, and the loaded car hanging back to slip through clean once the agent took the bait. The law's frustration is written right into the folklore. Atlanta police, chasing the bootlegger and future racing legend Roy Hall, reportedly gave up and called him a genius at the wheel, a grudging compliment from the very people he was outrunning. When the cops you're embarrassing start praising your driving, you've won the arms race. But the law did not just give up. This is the part the outlaw stories leave out. The police adapted. If the runners had their legends, so did the law. And the most feared of them all was a Kentucky federal agent named William Big Six Henderson. Big Six was a revenuer's revenuer. Over a 28-year career, by his own meticulous daily records, he broke up roughly 5,000 stills and sent some 5,600 moonshiners to jail. He was so feared across Kentucky that moonshiners painted Big Six on the sides of their whiskey barrels, and children jumped rope to a chant about him. "My mother told me to watch the still in case Big Six came over the hill." Henderson understood something crucial. In this war, the car was only half the battle. You could rarely outdrive a purpose-built whiskey car in a straight chase. So the law learned to win the other way, with intelligence, surveillance, stakeouts, informants, and ambush. Sit still in the woods, watch the routes, know where the runner is going before he does. It's the exact same lesson the Texas Rangers learned chasing Bonnie and Clyde a decade earlier. When you can't win on horsepower, you win on patience. And slowly, the hardware caught up too. As Detroit began building genuinely fast factory cars in the 1950s, the overhead valve V8 engines, the purpose-built pursuit packages we have covered in other Badges and Chrome episodes, law enforcement finally had vehicles that could run with the runners. The moonshiners' speed advantage, which had lasted 30 years, began to close. The whole cops and bootleggers car war was eventually compressed into an hour of television. The History Channel's Modern Marvels traced police pursuit technology straight back to chasing moonshine runners in hopped-up vehicles, which is exactly the lineage we're walking through here. So picture the state of play by the late 1940s. A generation of runners with the fastest cars and the best drivers in America, and a generation of lawmen who'd been chasing them hard enough to make them legends. Both sides were about to discover that all that talent had somewhere else to go. There's a whole arms race playlist building here on Badges and Chrome. Cops versus criminals, decade by decade. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Here's what happens when you spend 20 years building the fastest cars in the country and learning to drive them better than anyone alive. Eventually, you want to know who's actually best, not against the law, against each other. Runners from one valley started racing runners from the next, in cow pastures and on dirt tracks, for nothing but bragging rights. The cars were the same whiskey cars. The drivers were the same men the revenuers couldn't catch. And in February 1948, a Florida promoter named Bill France Sr. gathered drivers, mechanics, and track owners at the Streamline Hotel in Daytona Beach and organized it all into a sanctioned series. NASCAR was born. The conventional story says NASCAR was a clean, family-friendly motorsport built from scratch. The truth is that its first stars walked in straight off the moonshine routes, men who, at the time of their first big wins, still had active federal interest in their whereabouts. Roy Hall, the genius at the wheel the Atlanta police couldn't catch, dominated early Southern stock car racing while still hauling liquor during the week. Lloyd C., considered one of the most naturally gifted drivers of that early era, won 3 races in just 9 days in 1941 and was shot to death in a moonshine dispute the very next morning at age 21. Curtis Turner, Wendell Scott, Junior Johnson, nearly every founding name in the sport had run whiskey, run from the law, or both, and the cars carried over as literally as the men. A Ford coupe that hauled liquor on Friday night could be racing on Sunday afternoon, same engine, same suspension, same modifications, sometimes with the auxiliary fuel tank still bolted in. The skills the runners used to beat the police, controlling a heavy car at speed, on bad roads, in the dark, with everything on the line, were exactly the skills that won races. They didn't learn to race and then run whiskey. They learned to outrun the law and then discovered that was a sport. No one embodies this better than Junior Johnson. Born in 1931 in Wilkes County, North Carolina, Junior grew up in one of the biggest moonshine operations in the state and started hauling as a teenager. On the road, the law could not catch him. He'd later say he learned every car control trick he ever used on a racetrack while outrunning federal agents in the dark, sometimes with his headlights off. And here's the proof of just how good he was. The revenuers never caught Junior Johnson behind the wheel. Not once. When the federal agents finally got him in 1956, they didn't run him down on a highway. They ambushed him on foot, at dawn, at his father's still, where he'd gone to light the fire. He served 11 months in a federal penitentiary and went straight back to racing, where he became one of the greatest drivers in NASCAR history. The story has a final twist that says everything about how America came to feel about this whole backroad war. Decades later, in the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan granted Junior Johnson a full presidential pardon for that moonshining conviction. The man the federal government once jailed for running whiskey was pardoned by the President of the United States and called it one of the best things that ever happened to him. That's the arc of the entire story in one life. The law chased these men for decades. It caught some of them. And in the end, the country decided the men it had been chasing were folk heroes, and the chase itself had built one of America's great sports. Here's the thread that runs underneath this whole story, and it's the one most tellings of the moonshine and NASCAR legend completely miss. That decades-long backroad war didn't just build a sport, it helped build the modern police car. Think about the problem from the law's side. For 30 years, the revenuers and the local police were stuck in the same trap. They were chasing purpose-built machines in cars that were anything but. A federal agent or a county deputy drove whatever the government budget would cover. A plain, stock sedan, bought cheap, sent out exactly as it left the factory. The moonshiner, meanwhile, was driving a car that some of the best self-taught mechanics in America had spent weeks modifying for one single purpose: to beat exactly that government car. It was a mismatch baked in from the start. The runner optimized for the chase. The cop drove an appliance, and the law slowly, painfully, learned the lesson the hard way. The same lesson Frank Hamer learned chasing Bonnie and Clyde in the very same years. If you're going to catch a fast car, you need a fast car. Not a gun, not more men, a faster machine. The revenuers who actually caught runners, men like Big Six Henderson, mostly won with patience and intelligence, but everyone in the chase understood that the hardware gap was the core problem, and that as long as it existed, the law would always be playing catch-up in the literal sense. So watch what happens next, because the timing is not a coincidence. By the early 1950s, right as the moonshine wars were at their peak and stock car racing was exploding out of them, Detroit started building genuinely fast factory cars, the overhead valve V8 engines, and then the first true factory police packages. Ford's police package arrived in 1950, Chevrolet followed in 1955, Chrysler's Dodge package in 1956. For the first time, a sheriff's department could order a car from the factory that was actually built to chase, heavy-duty suspension, bigger cooling, more power, all standard. The era of the cop driving a plain civilian sedan against a purpose-built outlaw machine was finally ending. The moonshine runners didn't just train the drivers who founded NASCAR. They spent 30 years proving, over and over, on 1,000 dark mountain roads, that ordinary police cars weren't good enough. And that lesson was part of what pushed American law enforcement toward the purpose-built pursuit car. The same arms race that produced Junior Johnson and Curtis Turner also helped produce the factory police Interceptor. Both sides of that back-road war, it turns out, were building the future of the automobile. The outlaws built a sport, and they forced the law to build a better cop car. It's the through line of this whole channel. The police car didn't evolve in a vacuum. It was dragged forward, decade by decade, by the people the police were chasing. So, go back to that federal agent, sitting in the dark with his lights off, listening for an engine he knew he probably couldn't catch. He was on the losing end of most of those chases, but he was also, without knowing it, part of something bigger. Every time he forced a runner to build a faster car, to drive a little harder, to shave a few seconds off a mountain route, he was helping forge the talent that would fill the first starting grids of NASCAR. The law and the outlaws built that sport together, on opposite ends of the same chase. The history of American stock car racing didn't start in a boardroom in 1948. It started on 1,000 dark back roads, in a war between the men hauling whiskey and the men sworn to stop them, a war fought entirely on four wheels. This is Badges and Chrome, the channel that covers the police cars' history almost forgot, including the cars on both sides of the law. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.